How to avoid noise in communication. The 5 types of noise in communication are cultural, psychological, environmental, physiological impairment, and semantic. Cultural noise occurs in societies with many cultures that coexist, like the United States. This occurs because people in one culture believe that people in other cultures should interact like their culture does. This leads to people from one culture believing there is a right way versus a wrong way to interact with other people. An example of cultural noise in a society is a Christian saying Merry Christmas to anyone during the holidays. If a Jewish person is receiving this message, it can be taken the wrong way because they do not celebrate Christmas.
Psychological noise refers to the internal factors that lead to misunderstandings in the communication process. Psychological noise can be experienced through a wide variety of situations. From interactions with people to daily frustrations, psychological noise has a large impact on daily life. This type of noise involves the internal factors that lead to miscommunication, as it distracts the listener from what is being said. This is a mental barrier within communication. 2 things that impact perception leading to psychological noise are selective exposure, which involves exposing oneself to information that reinforces rather than contradicts our beliefs or opinions, and selective perception, which is the tendency to observe what we want to see, hear, and or believe. People are unaware of all the ways in which psychological noise impacts them because some of the elements are influenced by the subconscious mind. You can consciously be aware of bias and sources of anxiety, but there are subconscious influences that you may not be aware of or may not appear until they are provoked. Some examples of psychological noise are bias, assumption, preconceived notions, sarcasm, anxiety, daydreaming, worry, annoyance, and perception.
Our 3rd type of noise is environmental noise, which basically more colloquially is known as background noise. And environmental noise consists of any outside factors that interfere with the message that you're trying to send. So this can include cars honking their horns in traffic, a thunderstorm, or going to a rock concert. Just any loud noise in the most basic sense of the word. And environmental noise makes it much more difficult for the listener to really get the intended message because the signal is so distorted and messed with. And most importantly, environmental noise reduces what is called the signal-to-noise ratio. And we typically want the signal-to-noise ratio to be maximized because we want to hear the most of the signal and the least of the noise. But as environmental noise increases, the SNR is decreased. Our 4th type of noise is physiological impairment noise. And basically this consists of any sensory physical problems that interfere with communication. So the more obvious subcategory of this would be hearing loss for obvious reasons, because if you as the listener cannot hear properly what the speaker is saying to any degree, the message will be interrupted, you won't be able to perceive its full extent. And a more subtle subcategory of physiological impairment noise would be vision loss, because us as listeners, whether we are hearing impaired, whether we have no hearing loss problems, we tend to look at the person that is speaking, we will read their lips, kind of watch the positions of their articulators and see what phonemes they're producing. We look at their facial expressions, their gestures, their body language. These all contribute to us receiving the intended message. So any form of vision loss will interrupt this aspect of communication. Essentially what happens with physiological impairment noise is that the signal gets distorted, and if we're dealing with hearing loss, the amplitude of the signal will be reduced for the person who is perceiving it. Basically, the sound will sound quieter than it would otherwise. And this is also true for people who have age-related hearing loss. And in these cases, it's much harder for them to hear high-frequency noises, so speakers who have higher-pitched voices. Either type of physiological impairment noise will inevitably lead to frustration on both sides. because the speaker might have to repeat themselves, and there might be other just unnecessary interruptions to the natural flow of communication.
So, the last type of communication noise that we will be talking about today is semantic noise. And this is when noise occurs when there are issues with the meanings of words. And that's where the word semantic comes from. One of the largest examples of semantic noise would be language barriers. And language barriers can be many different things, such as barriers of actual languages spoken throughout different parts of the world, or just different different words used for different regions of a nation, like in the United States. Or if it's just texting languages, that's different, or different education levels that other people may not understand. If one person only speaks English and another person only speaks Spanish, they're not going to be able to communicate with each other, and that's because of semantic noise. Another example would be people speaking the same actual language, but they're from different regions of a nation. So in the East Coast of the United States, when people want a soft drink, they usually ask for a soda. But in other areas, like in the Midwest of the United States, if they want a soft drink, they ask for a pop. There can also be language barriers between people who just have different education levels, like professionals such as professors or doctors or lawyers. They don't often realize that other people don't have the same knowledge on their specific field as they do, so people don't really understand their vocabulary, so there's a lot of confusion between that, which causes a language barrier. Therefore, it is semantic noise.
Cultural noise can be avoided when companies train their employees on how to interact with individuals from various cultures within the society they live.
Psychological noise cannot be completely avoided because one is not fully aware of their subconscious mental barriers. Some ways to reduce psychological noise are to acknowledge and become more aware of your bias and perceptions, among other mental barriers, so that you can look out for and try to avoid falling into these traps within your communication.
Environmental noise can be avoided by changing your pitch and speaking louder so you can be heard by the person you're trying to communicate with. Physiological impairment noise can be removed by lip reading, wearing hearing aids, getting a cochlear implant, or using vision loss solutions such as Braille. Semantic noise can be avoided by having a third-party mediator, explaining to your partner what you're trying to convey, or asking for clarity when you're not quite sure what the speaker meant to say. Discussion questions. Number 1. How could you personally work to avoid cultural noise in communication? Number 2. Which type of noise do you think is most prevalent in everyday life? Explain.